I stood on the balcony, looking out on the temple that the castle was attached to. Our order had grown over the years, and we now had thousands of Force users studying the way of the will. Sereno had become a calm, tranquil place to live, and a bastion for those who needed aid. We'd turned our order into a true peacekeeping force that helped negotiate peace around the galaxy, fed those who were hungry, and helped with disaster relief when needed. We were teachers, physicians, and emergency responders. We had become like the Jedi of old who were open to the public, taught those who wished to learn, and shared our wisdom and knowledge freely. It's amazing how far we've come, isn't it? Anakin asked as he moved to stand beside me. To think it started with just the 5 of us and grew into all this over our lifetime. I smiled up at him. His hair was white now, along with his beard. Age had claimed his face, but the scar he'd been given was as prominent as ever. He was dashing in person and radiant in the Force. He'd reached his full potential sometime after the Clone War, and when we were together, the Force churned with power. That connection had never gone away. It really is, I replied. You have that look again, he chuckled as looked at me. What look? I asked innocently. He leaned down and pointed at my face. That look you get when you realize how old I look and you haven't aged a day. I blushed at the accusation. He was right. As always, I had stopped aging around 25. Time moved on for everyone else, but I kept the flower of you, my youth, perpetually. Others thought that I used the Force to maintain my appearance, but Anakin knew the truth. I'd told him long ago. He deserved to know. I lifted my chin haughtily. I don't know what you're talking about. I think the time is coming. I think it's here. He chuckled and nodded as he rested a hand on my cheek. I know. I could sense it. Is that why you're here? I asked sadly as I pressed my cheek into his hand. He nodded. I wasn't going to let you go without saying goodbye. My life didn't really start until you came into it. It's only right that I be here when you leave it. I embraced the sadness, allowing tears to flow as I looked up at him. Don't think that I'm happy to leave. But the Force is telling you it's time to go. He smiled with understanding. A younger Anakin, or Anakin from the original timeline, would roar in defiance and do whatever he could to stop the inevitable. But Anakin had matured over the years, and Dooku and Qui-Gon's teachings had allowed him to learn to accept the loss with grace and maturity. I smiled sadly and nodded. It is. Thank you for being here when the time finally came. Tell Luke and Leia. I will, he smiled tenderly at me. They'll be happy you're finally able to rest. Thank you, Anakin, I smiled. Thank you for everything. I released myself to the will of the Force and faded from reality. Unlike my time in the wasteland, I didn't leave the world violently. I didn't just fall asleep or pass out. I willed myself to go. I disappeared from the world and moved into darkness for a few moments. When I finally mustered the courage to open my eyes, Anakin, the castle, and the temple were gone. In their place was a modern hospital room with a television mounted to the wall with a news report playing. The news footage showed a massive explosion and a muscular figure clad in a bright blue bodysuit with red and white stripes in the shape of a stylized bird. Gold gauntlets, boots, and belt leapt away from it. He had golden blonde hair that stood up in 2 voluminous spikes and a wide grin as he carried several people away from the destruction. "Don't worry, citizens," he shouted with joy. "Everything will be all right, because I am here." I laughed mentally. That was All Might. And that meant that this was the My Hero Academia universe. I was brought home from the hospital later that day and spent the next few years getting acclimated to Japan. Sure, I'd been to Japan back when I was in the cyberpunk universe, but that was a whole different atmosphere and culture shift. At least I'd already learned the language. My parents were a Scottish couple who'd visited Japan and decided that they loved the country so much that they decided to move there. It wasn't until my first day of kindergarten that I realized exactly where in Japan I was. My mother brought me into the classroom and I sighed. I was so old mentally at this point that it almost felt insulting to be put here. But I was also old enough to know that when life let you relive your youth, that you should at least try to enjoy it. My opinion on the matter shifted when I heard a high-pitched voice shout, "Look! Kao-chan! A new student! Let's go say hello!" Two young boys ran over to us. One of them had large, wide, excited eyes and messy green hair. The other had short, spiky blonde hair and angular eyes. I almost laughed out loud when I say them. The boy with the green hair smiled wide at me. "Hi there, I'm Miduku Midoriya." "And I'm Bakugo Katsuki," the other boy said with a grin. I smiled and bowed politely. "Hello, my name is Merida Odum. I hope we can be friends." "We can be best friends, can't we, Kao-chan?" Midoriya said excitedly. "Yeah, Deku, we can let her be one of our friends," Bakugo replied. We hit it off perfectly. It wasn't long before the three of us were inseparable. We sat together in class, ate our meals together, and cleaned together. Since we all lived close, we even played and explored together outside of class. Even as kids in our class began to develop their quirks, we stayed together. Bakugo's quirk developed first. Then, to my surprise, I received a quirk. On top of all of the other abilities I'd collected through my lifetimes, I was now able to see the weak spot in things by focusing on them. It manifested itself as a target for me to shoot for. Following it to its source would let me attack the area with devastating results. It was an interesting quirk, to be sure, but that wasn't what people would think was my quirk. Midoriya, of course, didn't have a quirk. That wasn't going to stop me from convincing him from believing he could make a difference. Midoriya had one of the most analytical and strategic young minds in the world when it came to quirks, their application, and their tactical combinations with other perks. His ability to research and learn about quirk users was impressive by anyone's standards, and could be considered a quirk in and of itself. And instead of Midoriya studying individual heroes and their quirks, I encouraged him to study all perks and assume their highest level of threat. I used this to keep Midoriya and Bakugo close. Bakugo was dedicated and hyper-focused, with an axe to grind and a goal to reach. Midoriya would be his measuring stick. As Bakugo learned how to use his quirk, Midoriya would watch and learn, offer critics and suggestions, and inform him of his weaknesses. At the same time, Bakugo was Midoriya's wall. Someone as powerful as Bakugo was a constant challenge for Midoriya to overcome. Every time Midoriya came close to being able to beat Bakugo in a fight, Bakugo would get better. The pair fed off each other and made each other stronger and more capable. As for me, everyone believed my quirk was manipulating anything that had to do with a nuclear explosion. A powerful and dangerous set of abilities. That meant the explosion itself, the heat, the light, the radiation, the concussive force, and even the debris. This allowed me to express a number of my other abilities in the guise of a single, powerful quirk. I used these abilities to help train Bakugo and Midoriya. As we grew, our time to play after school was mostly taken up by training and exercise. By the end of middle school, both of them were fighting fit. Bakugo was far more capable than he was in the original story, and Deku was capable in his own right, easily a match for most any professional sidekick. I was lucky to have learned a number of different martial arts in the cyberpunk and Star Wars universes, and I taught them all I knew, so that when it came time for the UA exam, they would come out on top. The day of UA exam had finally arrived. Unlike in the original story, Midoriya and Bakugo were a formidable team, and so Midoriya never met. All Might. This meant that he never tried to save Bakugo from the slime villain, and was never given All Might's quirk, One for All. The three of us went to UA together as we'd done most everything else together since we were kids. "Don't you let us down, Deku," Bakugo growled with anticipation. "You may be quirkless, but that's no excuse for you to lose these rookie punks." Deku had a confident smile. He was much stronger and more athletic than he was even after All Might's training in the original story. "Don't you worry, Kachan. I've already got a game plan. And thanks to the stuff Little Red helped me build, I'll be able to take on anything they throw at us." I smiled up at Deku. "Your ideas for the gear were really good. I just hope that what we made was good enough for the practical exam." "Are you kidding?" Deku laughed. "I bet most pros don't have gear this good. There's no way I'll be able to fail with this stuff and all the training we did." It was true. I might have gone a little bit overboard on helping him build some hero gear. But I just always pictured Deku as this universe's Batman. That's actually happy. With his mind, some physical training, and the right gear, he'd be able to go toe-to-toe with most any villain. I manipulated the walkway to snag Deku's shoe, causing him to trip. He didn't hit the ground, thanks to the timely intervention of Ochako Uraraka. I'd seen her out of the corner of my eye, and figured they should probably meet in the same way they did in the original story. She used her anti-gravity powers to stop him from falling, and they started talking as Bakugo and I continued walking. We were stopped by a small figure who leapt out in front of us. Even I had to look down to see him. He had a chubby face and a short, petite figure. Saying he was short was something when even I had to look down to look him in the eye. His telltale great ball hairstyle was distinctive. It was Minoru Mineta, and he was staring up at me and drooling. Those muscles, that hair, those eyes, those boobs, Mineta groaned as he looked up at me. "You're perfect. How can you look like that when we're nearly the same age? What's your secret?" Bakugo snorted derisively, but I chuckled and waved him on. As Bakugo continued without me, I put on a domineering expression and leaned down to smirk superiorly at Mineta. "You like what you see, huh?" Mineta let out an excited whimper and nodded. I put a finger firmly under his chin. "Maybe, if you're a good boy and pass the exam with the highest score, Mommy will reward you." Mineta's eyes went wide and he began to bleed from his nose. His face flushed red as he stared up at me with excitement, mumbling incoherently. I chuckled and scraped my nail under his chin and turned to walk off. Make Mommy proud. I knew I'd left the little pervert in a sea of fantasies and just giggled as I added a little bit of sway to my walkaway for him. I hadn't gotten too far until I heard someone calling my name. "Merida!" a girl's voice shouted. I stopped and turned to see Tapriya running over to me. She would have knocked me over with her hug if I hadn't locked myself to the ground.
Tapriya Goodwin. Quirk, finger guns. Tapriya can fire different caliber air bullets by mimicking different types of guns with her hands. She can regulate the power behind her shots from a minimum of a puff of air up to the maximum strength of the weapon she's mimicking.
"Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you," she shouted as she hugged me. I laughed and hugged her back. "I'm happy you're here." "So are we," another voice called from the side. A young man with shoulder-length black hair, brown eyes, and sharp features walked towards us beside a girl with blue eyes and a mass of pink octopus tentacles for hair. Tapriya and I looked at them curiously. "Oh, come on, you don't recognize us," the boy shouted. Tapriya and I looked at each other, then back to the other two. "Nope." "Sorry," Tapriya said. "Should we?" I asked. "We're Serena and Alan." The girl laughed at Alan's frustration.
Serena Thigh! Quirk, octopus. Serena's hair is a mass of pink octopus tentacles that tend to curl up into heart shapes. She does anything an octopus can, including camouflage, squeezing into tight spaces, using her tentacles and suction cups to move around and grab things, and can release ink from her pores. Alan Amel, quirk, rift. Alan can open rifts that can appear in multiple locations. Whatever goes in one rift comes out of the other rift at the same speed and angle as it went into the first one.
Our faces lit up, and we both hugged the other two. I can't believe you two are here as well, I exclaimed. There's never been more than 3 of us at a time. Then maybe you should add one more to the count, another boy's voice said as he approached us. He was lithe, with pale skin, short, spiky brown hair, and brilliant red eyes. We all stared at him, and my heart rose in my chest. I had hope that it could have been. My parents named me Shichi Kagami, he explained. But most of you know me best as... I doubled over, barking out a laugh and pointed at the boy. They actually named you Seven.
Shichi Kagami, quirk, vampire. Shichi can control his blood and turn it into any object he can imagine. He can also do the same to anyone whose blood he drinks. He only needs a single drop.
The others looked at the boy cautiously. They hadn't had the same experiences with Seven as I had, and hadn't come to the same resolutions with him. So you're definitely the villain, Alan remarked. Let's just defeat him now and get it over with, Priya said, as she pointed her hand at Seven and mimicked a gun. Seven just stared at the nonplussed. I'm not a villain. I'm here trying to become a hero. Oh, please, Serena said as flipped one of her tentacles from her face haughtily. Just look at you. You even look like a villain. All you're missing is the maniacal laugh. I can't help how I look, Seven protested. He looked at me to intercede on his behalf. Stop it, you guys, I said as I walked up to Seven and offered him a hand. He's been going through a lot just like we have. We need to give him the benefit of the doubt. Seven smiled appreciatively down at me and shook my hand. Thanks you, Merida. I really want to try and use this life to make a better impression. You do totally look like a villain, though, I snickered. I can't help that, he shouted in protest. Excuse me? A soft voice called to our group. We all turned and looked at the speaker. It was Principal Nezu. He was an anthropomorphic mouse with a scar over his right eye, wearing a dress shirt, vest, and slacks. He was very soft-spoken and smiled at us as we realized who it was and bowed accordingly. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the exams are about to start, he chuckled. Please find your way to your designated classroom. Yes, sir, we all said in unison. Miss O'Doom, he said as we started to head inside. I stopped and looked back at him while the others continued inside. Yes, sir? How can I help you? He smiled up at me. As you know, someone with radiation-based powers is closely monitored because of the health risks such powers pose to the general public. I nodded. It was true. The moment I had settled on focusing on those aspects of my powers to give me the broadest selection of my powers without causing too much suspicion, my family had regular visits from government officials who would check the radiation levels around our home, school, and the general area. They would also check to see if I was causing radiation just with my presence. They were always polite and professional about the process, but it did hamper things slightly. Yes, sir, I replied. I have my most recent examination card to show that I'm not an exposure threat if you want it. He smiled and shook his head. No, that's all right. We've already spoken with your local authorities. However, the faculty has decided that to keep the other students' minds at ease during the practical, you will be given your exam away from the other students. So, after your written exam, you'll follow Miss Midnight to your exam field. I nodded and smiled appreciatively. I understand, sir. May I request something before the practical? What is it? He asked inquisitively. I have an idea of what the practical will entail, I admitted. And I assume you have spare opponents in case some malfunction or something unexpected occurs. Would you mind sending all of the spares into my exam along with whatever number you were planning on sending to begin with? Principal Nezu laughed at the idea. That's quite a request. Do you really think you can manage such a large number of opponents safely? I nodded confidently. I've been practicing with my quirk ever since I got it. I've had to, so that the government inspectors would find that I was being responsible with it. I'm pretty sure I can handle whatever you throw at me in the time allowed. The principal made a show of considering my offer. I will consider your request and discuss it with the rest of the faculty while you take the written exam. Now, get your classroom and do your best. Yes, sir, I bowed politely. I marched toward the classroom with enthusiasm. Today was going to be an amazing day.